Okay, hi. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Morning. Okay, so I'm happy you guys are here, and my talk is about external authentication 101. And we can do that now with all our products, Percona Server, for MySQL, MongoDB, Postgres, and PMM. So introduction about me. So my name is Jaime Sicam. I'm a senior support engineer at Percona. And given that I'm a support engineer dealing with customers, I don't maintain my own external authentication mechanism. So I help customers integrate them with their DB servers or PMM. And in support, we have three teams, Americas, EMEA, and I'm sorry, I'm going to kill that first. Just a moment. I think I am logged into Slack. Okay, so yeah. Sorry for the disruption. So we have three teams. We have the Americas team, the EMEA team, and the APAC team. So we all work on our time zones, so that's well balanced and well balanced lifestyle. Since I'm from the APAC team, I'm based in Manila, Philippines. So, yeah. Okay. So about external authentication, my topic. So basically, this is a third-party system, so it's really not part of all the products that I've mentioned. We'll use a third-party system that we can use to check if a user can log in or not. And normally it's the user and the password. And so if we put this in one centralized system, you can provide the centralized information and management of users and groups. So basically, if you need to add a user for all the DB servers, you can just add in the authentication system, and they would have access to the DB servers and PMM. So, but it really depends. It depends on the configuration. So you may need to do some additional settings in those DB servers and PMM. And well, simply what we can also do is we can identify what a user can do based on its membership. So for example, if the user is part of the developers group, we want the user to have developer privileges in the DBA server. Or if we want the user to just have a viewer role in PMM, we can do that by setting its membership. So some security considerations. Definitely for those where you need to pass the information to the DB server or PMM, and then that information will be passed to the external authentication system, is that the credentials have to be submitted in plain text, because what does the external authentication know about the MySQL hash passwords? So they don't. So you have to pass this information plain to the external authentication system. So you have to ensure that TLS SSL transport is used when communicating this information. So it means that you can set it encrypted or not encrypted. So you have to configure that yourself. So just make sure that the communication between your client and your DB servers or PMM are secure, and from the DB server to the DB server, PMM, and external authentication systems as well. And take note that if you use an external authentication system, that if it's down, then no one will be able to log in. So you need to make it highly available, but that's not the coverage of this talk. So the interesting thing about external authentication now is that you have choices. So mainly, Ldap is the one that is available on all of our products. So we will focus more on the Ldap. And we can also use spam. So if you want to bundle your security with different type of settings, like we want the user to log in at a certain time, so you can use spam. You can use spam for that, and you can use it for MySQL, MongoDB, and Postgres, For MongoDB and Postgres, there's Kerberos, and I believe it's available also in MariaDB. Uh, and for others, so there are other settings that you can do to authenticate with Postgres, like Radius. So if you were there during the times when we were with internet service providers using Radius for authenticating users, and so that was popular then. And for PMM, we'll talk about other authentication systems like OAuth, or services that use OAuth like Okta and Auth0. Okay, so I realized I was hitting the mic. So we have so it's definitely hard to do this. I don't know what what systems that our customers are using. So I have to have my own sandboxes because definitely I won't have access to their system. So what I do set up is I use VirtualBox for my virtual machines. I use Vagrant for provisioning VMs, OS, disk and networking, and automate generating SSL certificates using Bash. I know there are other tools, but I guess this one is easier for me. And then for configuring the, for example, the external authentication system and setting it up, I use Ansible for that so that I can repeat it and destroy it anytime that I want. Also for the DB servers as well, and PMM. And for now, I'm using the latest, although it's CentOS 8, so the updates are well, it's not as supported as before. CentOS 8, it would be the operating system right now. And the external authentication system that is available on the Sandbox is Samba, compiled from source code, OpenLDAP with debug logging, and bare installation setup of DB servers and PMM, and also multi-factor authentication in the installation setup of DB servers. So that being said, let's take a look at LDAP. So LDAP, everyone knows this one. It's a lightweight directory access protocol. It's a standard protocol for managing directory services for users, groups, devices, and anything that you can think of. And typically, enterprise applications have this configuration setting where you can enable LDAP for, say, contact addresses or authentication. So it's definitely popular. And so this protocol can be used to access data for Samba, OpenLDAP, Active Directory, Red Hat Directory Server. So typically, what does an entry of an LDAP look like? So we have the DN, so the unique name for the unique ID for the entry. We have an object class, which tells us the makeup of the entry. And it also tells us what is the required and optional properties of the entry and the attributes to provide information about the entry. So here's an example of what that object class looks like. For example, we have a object class called PostgreSQL account, and it says here that it's required that it has a CN, common name, UID, UID number, GID number, home directory, but it may also contain a user password, login shell, geckos, and description. So a sample LDAP entry would look like this. Okay, so this is the DN, so the unique ID of this entry, and then it has the object class PostgreSQL account, and it has everything that is required, but it also has this additional attribute called user password. So it only had user password, and it doesn't contain, user password and login shell, but it doesn't have geckos and description. So with LDAP authentication and authorization, authentication can be done in two ways. One is bind. So with bind, you need to specify the unique ID or the unique ID of the entry that you want to log into. the account that you want to log into, and provide the password. So sometimes it's kind of tedious because you have to put, for example, CN is equal to Jaime, comma, CN is equal to users, comma, CN is equal to Percona, and CN is equal to local. So you have to provide that whole entry and then provide the password to be able to bind directly or to log into to that account. And the other one is search plus bind, which is a two-step process. First, if you provide a username, it will try to find the DN using a query in the directory. And once it's found, so basically, for example, you're going to search for a username in the directory entry in the directory, and when you find the username, you get the DN or the unique ID of the entry, and then you bind with that entry and the password provided. So that's basically what is done for authentication. Whereas for authorization, once you're able to know that the user is able to log in, is able to use the password correctly, it will just have to search the directory if the authenticated user is a member of a particular group. So basically, after authenticating, check if the user is an administrator or part of the administrator group or part of the developer group. Okay? And you should know a bit about Ldap filters to be able to configure Ldap on these services. So for example, you want to match if the CN entry or CN property exists in a record, so CN is equal to asterisk. We have CN is equal to DBA user. Match if CN value is DBA user. Check if the object class is a group. Check if the object class is a group, or, so it uses a pipe over here, it's a group or it's a POSIX group. So basically, if you take a look at this, POSIX group normally used in OpenLDAP and group used in Samba. So basically, this is like a filter that could work both for Samba and for OpenLDAP. So one size fits all. So you may want just one of them or both. It's up to you. So the second to the last one is object class is equal to group. Sicam is equal to DB admins if you want to check if the object class is a group, and CN is DB admins. And finally, this one. So it has a not operator. So you want to look for objects or entries that are a group, but the CN is not DB admin. So you're looking for all groups where CN is not DB admin. So tips on troubleshooting Ldap. So basically, it's best to troubleshoot it first in Ldap before configuring it in the DB server. So you should know what parameters do you need to authenticate. Does it support TLS or SSL? If it doesn't, contact your administrator. Say it's not secure. Please use SSL certificates. What ports are used to connect to Ldap? 386, 636. What account can I use to authenticate to Ldap? So like a search user. Find out how to search users and its properties using the filters. And find out how to enumerate groups and its properties, again with the filters. And if you're not getting the result that you want, you can run Ldap search with debugging. So here's some command line tools used for manipulating Ldap. So for example, Ldap search parameters, you can see this a lot with Google. There's this variable Ldap TLS rexcert. So do you want to verify that the server that you are connecting to is the server that you are really connecting to, if it has the correct SSL certificate. So sometimes when you're just testing, you put never, but that's not good. It's best to use demand or not to use this entry at all. And then you have -D for the debug level. You'd have -H to specify the protocol if you want to connect to Ldap without encryption. or LDAPs with SSL encryption, or you can use TLS with -Z, so you can connect to a LDAP protocol and then upgrade the connection to TLS, and then you can bind with simple authentication, meaning a user and a password instead of other authentications like certificates and SASL. And then you specify the B where you will start searching for the records. And then -D would be the information about the user, the DN entry of the user, and -W. So there's a -W if you want to enter the password all the time. But I guess for testing and troubleshooting, that two-step process of entering LDAP search followed by -W and specifying the password takes long because you have to type the password. So sometimes I would just use -W to test inline. Anyway, this is just for testing. And then for your filters, you enclose it in parentheses. And if you're just going to extract some items from the entry, you just put it in quotes. Okay, so this is an example of using LDAP without without specifying a search filter or attribute. So when you do that, for example, you do this. So when you do that, you'll be able to have access to every entry within this base. So sometimes you would like to get all this information for troubleshooting. Okay, so more information about it. So there are groups, and there's a user. Okay, and so this is an example if you want to troubleshoot if your LDAP search is working correctly. So I have configured OpenLDAP to do debug logging. So from the OpenLDAP, you can see from var/log/d if how you are connected to the system. So here it's logged in as the manager, percona.local, and then from here the filter says object class is equal to POSIX group, and then search attribute CN. So all the information in the log corresponds to the parameters that you have specified from LDAP search. So that can be useful for debugging. So this is an example of it didn't work. So for example here, there's LDAP SASL bind simple, can't contact, and that information is not useful on its own. So if I take a look at the open LDAP log, I can see that the error is a TLS negotiation failure. So it means that it looks like the server certificate could not be verified. So here I tried to run LDAP search again with the debug option, and then I can see here certificate verification error, and it says that it's a self-signed certificate, but it's the CA certificate authority is unknown. So for issues like this, and you want to verify that the server certificate is a good certificate, then you have to edit etc open ldap.conf and add the CA certificate there. So once you add this information and you try this again, you'll be able to log in. Okay, so this one is not really necessary for troubleshooting LDAP, but I just added it in the slides. So you could add an entry using Ldap Add. So you'll create an Ldap file and then use Ldap Add to add the entry. So once I added the entry here, I could search it here using Ldap search. And then Ldap modify. So for example, I have this everyone group, and I wanted to add DBA user 4 to everyone group. So I had to create this LDIF entry and use Ldap modify to modify the entry. So, and then if you will need to delete, you can delete via and use the filter, use the DN of the entry to delete it. So search for cn dev user 03 users percona.local to delete this entry. So that being said, it's a bit tedious to use Ldap add, Ldap modify, Ldap delete. So you can use GUI tools, maybe like Ldap Account Manager. And for some cases, for troubleshooting fast and being able to add users, I use Samba. Because with Samba, if I want to add a user, I just say Samba tool user, create guest user pass 01. So I'm adding a user called guest user with this password. For Samba, if I want to list the users, I just say Samba tool user list. If I want to know entries about that user, I say Samba tool show guest user. So I get all the Ldap entries also. If I want to create a group, I can say Samba tool group add guest group. Or you need to enumerate the groups. So group Samba tool group list. Or you need to add members to the group. So I'm adding guest user to the guest group. And this one, I want to know details about the guest group. So this is very easy to use Samba to manage your Ldap entries, your Ldap directory. However, you still need to at least learn about filtering, running queries to filter how to get a user and how to enumerate its groups. So this one just makes it quick to create and manage users and groups. So once you're able to troubleshoot and take a look, use Ldap search, even for Samba, let's just say that you realize that these are the server details that you've gotten from them, that you could use that this is the host and this is the port and this is the protocol, or you can use port 389, but the protocol has to be TLS, so you have to upgrade the connection to TLS. And then this would be the credentials. So for example, for OpenLDAP manager Percona local, and password is Percona live admin 2022. And this would what a user details would look like. And if you want to filter, maybe you'd like to use UID or CN. So again, you really need to explore the Ldap entries to find out what you need to use as a filter. Okay, and for group details, member UID, as you can see here, the member UID for groups in OpenLDAP here is it doesn't provide the full DN of the user. So this is something that you have to take note of when you're going to do group mapping. So on the other hand, using Samba, or somewhat like an AD implementation or AD clone. So if you notice, the information is almost the same, except that for the credentials, you can see that the administrator has CN users, and even groups are part of the CN users in Samba. And if you take a look at the member details, it has the full DN compared to OpenLDAP. So these are the intricate things that you need to consider if you're going to use LDAP for or direct LDAP configuration with Percona programs or DB servers and PMM. So if you're going to integrate LDAP with Percona Server for MySQL, so basically there's an Ldap authentication plugin that's available since 8.0.19. It's a community contribution by Francisco Miguel Biete, and in upstream it's an enterprise feature, LDAP. But here you can get it from Percona Server for free. So when troubleshooting, you can take a look at the LDAP source. So I did take a look at that to understand how group mapping works with this plugin. And of course, our documentation for simple LDAP and our blog article about introducing LDAP authentication, and also MySQL on how group mapping is used in MySQL. So it's actually very similar. That's why it helped me troubleshoot LDAP authentication plugin for Percona Server. Okay, so as you can see, it's so quick that I can talk about the one for MongoDB. But the thing is, it's if I talk about the configuration, it's going to take the full even for just one database server, it's going to take the full session. So I've placed all of this in a sandbox. So for example, let me just share what it looks like. So so this would be what the sandbox data would look like. So there's a Vagrant file for provisioning the VMs. I'll just show you quickly what it looks like. So something like setting up your Ansible controller, Samba, Ldap, MySQL 1, 2, 3, MongoDB, MongoDB 2, MongoDB 3, Postgres 1, 2, and 3, PMM 1, and 1 for multi-factor. And so with the controller, with the Ansible controller, it has the instructions on how to set this up. And this is available on GitHub, so you can use this for testing. I will just show you how it works here. So for example, provisioning MySQL, I can just cat this one just to see, just so that you have an idea on how I was provisioning MySQL here. So disabling SE Linux, installing the Percona packages, copying certificates, starting it, and setting up the DNS. And for integration, I have this integration folder. So for example, for MySQL, so I have this in the folder. So let me just. So I have here all my notes for that. So for example, you want 1:1 mapping, one user account for one LDAP account. So the steps are here, and the variables that you need to edit is here. To use the Ldap server that is provisioned, and creating the users, performing the tests, for role access mapping, so that if the member is a part of a particular group, if the person is part of a group, it has these privileges. So I've provided instructions on creating the proxy account, using the no login plugin for the roles or the privileges that the users will not log into directly, but will be mapped to them. Proxy accounts, grant proxy, and then how to log in and test. So we can take a look at that later if there's time. But basically, I've documented it here on for MongoDB, MySQL, PMM, PostgreSQL if you want to, or Postgres if you want to try doing this from your test systems as well. Okay, so integrating LDAP with Percona Server for MongoDB. So there's so many options for Percona Server for MongoDB. So one is you can use LDAP authentication with SASL. And SASL is another authentication backend. And so with SASL, you can say you want to configure it to connect to LDAP, or configure it to connect to PAM, so, or use shadow passwords. So anything that is SASL authentication, that works with SASL authentication, you can use that with MongoDB. And it also has a direct library for connecting to Ldap. So you can use, again, a username and password to connect to Ldap. Okay, and then finally, if you don't like using usernames and passwords, you can also use certificates and use an Ldap authorization to check if to provide the role of the user that will log in. Okay, so next. So these are the references that you can take a look at about setting this up. But again, all the tests for this to work is in the Sandbox. Okay, and then integrating Ldap authentication with Postgres. So with Postgres, we have you can use simple bind mode. So you provide the username, and again, because it's bind, you have to say cn is equal to DBA user, cn is equal to user, dc is equal to Percona, dc is equal to local. That's too long. So with a simple bind mode in Postgres, there's a setting there where you can specify the string at the beginning of the username and the string at the end of the username. So you don't have to provide the whole DN itself. And it also has search plus bind mode. So with search plus bind mode, again, it made it simple, and it's a two-step process where you provide a username and a password, and the system will search for that user in the directory, find the DN, and log in using that DN and the password provided. And then lastly, you can still do group authorization in Postgres. Unfortunately, it's not Ldap based. So you need to create these groups and add the members of the groups in Postgres itself. So again, all of this is documented in the Sandbox. So if you want to know more about it, you can take a look at Auth0 in the Postgres docs and auth-pg hba-conf html in again also in Postgres to know how to configure these ones. Okay. Okay. So this one, I've added some settings here that we can see from the slides. So with PMM, we can integrate it with Ldap, Auth0 and Okta. So for example, if we're going to integrate it with Ldap, we need to edit the grafana.ini and add these settings that we're going to enable Ldap, and the configuration file is in etc grafana ldap.toml. So, and in the grafana.ldap.toml, it has this configuration. So as you can see, this configuration is familiar. You have your host, you have your port. Will you use SSL? Will you use TLS? Are you going to verify the certificate? Do you have the root CA certificate to verify? Okay. You have the bind DN, bind password for searching for the user, and your search filter. How do you search for users in Ldap? So in here, the example is based on the common name. And then where is the search base? And then finally here, which is important for role access mapping, is to search. So for this particular case, this is for OpenLDAP search filter. So you're going to search for object class POSIX group, and the member UID is what was used to log in. And then you will search this in the group search base, and you will search this and with the CN with CN. And then you can provide more information about or extract information about the entry using server.attributes. And so this is the important part with role access mapping. So you will specify here if the user is part of this group, the org role is admin. If the user is part of this group, the developers group, the org role is editor. And if the user is part of the everyone group, the org role will be viewer. And once you make these changes, you will just have to restart PMM server. So when you do that, although it's kind of small here, if I log in as DBA user, you can see here at the bottom that the role is admin. Whereas if I log in as a dev user 3, the role is editor. So it might be useful for you instead of having all users be admin, or have several users be admin actually, and some not. So the group filters will be helpful for that. So also, Grafana also supports OAuth authentication services such as Google, Azure, GitHub. Okay, so and Auth0 and Okta are Auth0 identity providers. So it has something that's very distinct, that when you try to log into a service, it redirects you to a different login page, and so that's basically OAuth authentication. And then there's some tokens going on for you to be able to authenticate with the right privileges. So for setting it up, you can take a look at grafana.com. Okay, for how to configure these. So for example, you're logged into Auth0, you have an account there, and you want to use role access mapping with Auth0. So what you would need to do, because by default it's not set, is you would need to enable authorization extension. So from here, you'll be able to create groups. You'll be able to create groups here. So for example, here I created an admin group, PMM admin, PM editor, and PBM viewer, and I added just a few members, or just one member for each group. And then the important part, because you just added this extension, is to be able to expose that group to PMM. So to expose that group, there are rules, and for this particular case, it would be this one. So basically, what you want to do is to expose in your token group information about the user. So, and also, basically in Auth0, you'll also create an application, and then you would have a client ID and a secret. And you also need to specify where it's being called from PMM. So you have to specify this setting. So the PMM URL followed by graph, login, generic OAuth. So for this case, we are allowing both HTTP and HTTPS. So it depends on your settings. And then in Grafana itself, you have to specify, let's say, the root URL, and then specify directly where it is actually located. So this will not work if you do not add this setting. So okay, and then finally you have to add the Auth0 configuration. So you provide the ID secret in the application that you'll be creating in Auth0, and you'll also need to provide the role attribute path so that you can classify what privilege will that user have. So when you do that, also you can also add logging. So if you want to debug if logging is not working, but if it does, when you go to the PMM website, there will be this option called sign in with Auth0, and when you click that, you will be redirected to Auth0 authentication. So if you're part of the right group, or if your account is valid, then you'll be able to log in. If you're part of the admin group, you will be having the admin role. So Okta, it's the same. Groups are not set in their API server, so you have to expose it as well. And For example, here, groups, ID token, you can specify how to claim that group or how to search for groups in the API authorization server. So from this scope, groups, you would like to search for groups, and it should match anything, dot asterisk. So once that is done, you also in Okta you also have to configure the login redirect also, and then in PMM you just need to edit Grafana init again. You need to specify root URL and the client ID, the secret, and auth URL token, API URL. So this information will be provided from the Okta website. And finally, the important part, which is to do the role attribute path. So basically, again, to designate the role of the user depending on who logged in or on your membership. So when you do configure it and you restart PMM server, when you log into PMM, there's again another additional authentication mechanism that when you log into Okta, you'll be going to the Okta prompt. Okay, so finally, in my talk, so I haven't really talked about PAM, so all of it is LDAP and OAuth. You can also do multi-factor authentication with PAM. So with PAM, it's up to you whatever PAM aware authentication mechanisms are available. You can use that. So you can use shadow password, so etc shadow. You can use LDAP. You can use Winbind. You can use SSSD. You can use Google Authenticator and many more. So so with Percona Server, PAM is available via the PAM authentication plugin. And Postgres, it's also available. They have the PAM authentication method for that. You just have to edit pg_hba.conf for this one. And for MongoDB, it doesn't have PAM directly, but it has SASL. And with SASL, you can configure it to use PAM. So we could have a demo. I'm just taking a look at the time. So 30 plus 10 so far, so 8 minutes. So like for example, multi-factor authentication demo, SSSD. So we can use relmd to join Samba, configure SSD to resolve usernames, create users on all DB servers. So yeah, so we could try this one. But do I have time for this? Okay. So I'm not sure. I don't think we have a lot of time for that. But it's all of this is configured from here. So let me just show you what this what this looks like. So let me see. So Vagrant. So for example, I'm going to up MySQL 3. It's not yet available. So hopefully it will be a bit faster. I don't know. Okay, sorry, it's taking time. Okay, so now that's done. I'll just do some provisioning. So I use Ansible for this one. Just going to fix SSH access first. Okay, any question? Any question? Anybody? So some of these are airing out because I haven't upped the services. So I will provision it. So I will just provision MySQL. Okay, so it's just installing the GPG key, it's installing the Percona repository. So any question? There's none. I don't think we'll have time to do the multi-factor, so I just want to show you how you can use the information from the GitHub or from my Sandbox to be able to set up Ldap authentication. So let's just try with MySQL. So that being said, I have this provision. So I have an Ldap server here. So tail-f var log slap.d. So we have our logging here, and we're just waiting for the Percona packages to be installed. Okay. Okay, just copying the cert. So okay, looks okay. Okay, so it looks okay. Let's just wait for this. So starting MySQL.
I mean, it's probably worth mentioning that in PMM, if you want to configure the external authentication, you're doing it inside a Docker container most of the time, and the etc directory is not preserved on container upgrades. So there's a UI upgrade for PMM as you go from version to version to version. You'll preserve if you go that route, but if you actually replace the container, all that configuration for Okta, for Ldap gets wiped. There are some workarounds, so usually I do it through environment variables so that every time I spin up a new container, it's just passed in and Grafana will inherit all the Grafana config values, but just FYI, that first time I did it and lost it, I got to start all over. Because I didn't take notes.
Or pass in an external directory so it's not lost.
That's what I do. I put my Ldap toml file in a stateful directory, and then all the configs in Grafana INI as an environment variable.
Thanks. So okay, so for example here, so let's do the long one, authentication, role with role access mapping. So I'll just follow the steps here. So I'm just going to add this in the configuration. So let's see, MyCNF. So these are the info. So okay, so I'm just adding these in these, and then I need to restart it so that the plugin will be reloaded. Okay, and then I'm going to create the proxy account. So with this proxy account, you can see here how it's being configured. So it will find it in users Percona local, and the Ldap user DB admins will be mapped to the MySQL DB admins user. The developers will be mapped to the MySQL developers Ldap group will be mapped to the MySQL developers group. Okay, so okay, so we want to make sure that those users with those privileges will not be able to log in. So we will disable that one. And then so I'm going to create the users. So one, MySQL DB admin. Okay. So so I'm creating these users, and then okay. So then one more. Okay. So just create these users, and then I'm gonna grant proxy access to these users. Okay. So one, and then another one. Okay. So I will try to log in. Let's see if we're able to log in. Let's just try to log in. So let's see if it works. So if I try to log in, yep, it works. So you can see that if I log in as dev user 3, and I didn't create a dev user 3 here, that its current user is MySQL developers. So if I just do this and run show grants, okay, so I can see that I have privileges to applications. And if you look at Ldap, it did the searching. So this is helpful for debugging, finding out if it's working or not. Okay, so bound as manager, or like for example here, let's start here. It logged in as the manager, and then it searched for dev user 3. It found it. So we're going to bind as the dev user 3, and then if it's successful, then it will log in again as manager, and then it will search the Ldap for that PostGres group and that member UID, and then once it has found the group, it will relay that to MySQL, and then MySQL in turn will specify if what kind of privileges that user will have. So, okay, so just second to the last slide. So that information, that Sandbox, if you'd like to use it as well, you can find it from github.com, Jaime Sicam External Authentication 101. And that's it. So let me just go back. So I guess there's no question, so thank you very much for coming.